Good evening, everyone. I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you fall asleep with these horror stories from bad loves. So before we begin, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. I'd love to know where you're from and what time you're watching this, so leave it in the comments. When you're ready, get comfortable and relax. It all started in high school when I met Emily. She was super smart, kind, and had that spark that made you think she could conquer the world, so it wasn't hard to fall in love with her. However, I knew from the beginning that she and I weren't going to last long together. Graduation was approaching, and she had her dreams in mind. She wanted to go to one of those big public universities in California, the ones she had always dreamed of. I, on the other hand, knew I was going to stay in Arizona. Maybe go to community college, something simpler. But I didn't want to stand in her way. I wasn't going to be the guy who thwarted her goals, so I told her we were going to go our separate ways. She understood, of course. She knew her dreams were more important than being with me. But so as not to lose faith, I applied to all those universities too, just in case. One day I came home after class, and the first thing I saw was a pile of letters on the table. All acceptance letters. I had been admitted to the 3 best universities where she wanted to study. I couldn't believe it. I started jumping and shouting with joy before calling Emily to tell her. I swear, at that moment I felt like the world was mine. I ran around the house like crazy, celebrating this great unexpected achievement. But when I finally made a video call to her, eager to give her the big news, I could tell something was wrong. She was crying, a lot. Her voice was broken, and her eyes were red. It turned out that she had actually been rejected everywhere. Imagine, that was like a bucket of cold water for poor Emily. While I was dying to share with her how happy I was, she could barely speak between sobs. At that moment, instead of sharing my good news with her, I decided to hide those letters in a drawer and asked her if she wanted to come over for a chat. When she arrived, I saw that she was completely devastated. Her face was swollen, her eyes were red and teary, and her makeup was smeared all over her face, including her mascara. It really broke my heart to see her like that. As a good boyfriend, I tried to calm her down, but it was of little use. She started telling me that she was so confident she would be accepted that she didn't even apply to other places, and now she felt like her life was a disaster, that everything was over for her. Emily repeated over and over that her future was ruined, and I had to do everything I could to calm her down. It took me a while, but in the end, she seemed a little better, although her expression was sad, very sad. And just then, after she calmed down, I told her the news, that all those universities had accepted me, and that I could actually choose whichever one I wanted. I didn't know what her choice would be, but one thing was certain. I was leaving. Probably to UCLA, if only for its journalism program, which was the best. Her face went blank, and without saying a word, she got up, dried her eyes, and left my house as if nothing had happened. Emily didn't say a single word. She didn't even say goodbye. The truth is, it made me feel a little bad, but I understood that she was still feeling bad about her own situation, and I figured she just needed some time to process things. A few minutes later, my parents arrived, and I told them how important this news was to me. They were ecstatic. Dad, as always, offered to pay for whatever the scholarships didn't cover, and that night we had a happy dinner and celebrated. I was on cloud 9, happy with myself and almost unable to believe what was happening to me. That night, all I could think about was what I had achieved and all the good things that were coming my way. I was so happy that Emily didn't cross my mind even for a moment, but just as dawn was breaking in the middle of the night, my phone started ringing over and over again. It was Emily. "Hello," I managed to say, half asleep. And that's when all the confusion began. She told me I couldn't go anywhere, that it was all a mistake, and that she didn't want me to go to California, that it would ruin everything. We argued for a while, and I reminded her that if the tables had been turned, I would have supported her without hesitation, so it wasn't fair for her to want me to miss out on this opportunity just because she hadn't been accepted. Then she started crying, saying that if I left, she would ruin her life and that I would take away everything that mattered to her. She accused me of taking her place, and even though I explained that we had applied for different things, she kept saying things that didn't make sense, like that I wouldn't go anywhere, that she wouldn't let me go. She said I had to stay with her, that it was my duty. No matter how hard I tried to reason with her, we had already spent an hour and a half crying on the phone, so I reached my limit. I told her I couldn't take it anymore and hung up. The next day at school, I was afraid to see her, to face her, but surprise, she was there as if nothing had happened, in the parking lot with a huge smile on her face, and without any shame, she kissed me as if nothing had happened. I asked her what she was doing, and she said she was just looking out for her boyfriend, as if she hadn't just insulted me and made a huge scene a few hours earlier. I was confused and didn't feel like fighting, so I just forced a smile and we went into school together. The rest of the day she was wonderful, making jokes, engaging in conversations with friends, and acting super affectionate. But it all started to seem very strange to me. At lunchtime, I told my friends that I was going to UCLA, that it was a reality, and they were all super excited. But Emily started acting kind of crazy, as if she were in another dimension. She said she had also been accepted and that we were going to live together in a little apartment, and that we were going to buy a car and do all that stuff together. But in reality, that was never going to happen. She was just pretending, and within a matter of days, her behavior got worse. She started making up plans that didn't exist, like enrolling in the same classes, buying groceries together, even things we had never discussed. And every time I asked her what was going on, she just laughed, changed the subject, and seemed like she had lost her mind. I was very concerned, so I decided to call her mom. Her mom knew about the rejections, but I'm sure she had lied to her, saying that we were just going to stay here and take classes in the city. I thought it was best to be honest with her and explain the situation. I told her that I was going to California, that we wouldn't be together anymore, and that I was sorry, but Emily was behaving in a way that frankly scared me. But the woman didn't say anything right away. She just stayed silent and then shouted angrily, "Wow, you stole her spot." I think her mom was just as crazy as she was. That's when I decided I couldn't have anything to do with that girl anymore. That night in my room, I stayed up for hours, calling UCLA and officially accepting the offer. The woman who answered was very nice and told me that they had been very impressed with my essay. That made me feel weird because in reality it was Emily who had written it, but I didn't tell her that. Hours later, my mom called me to dinner and I was in the kitchen, but Emily was there, sitting at the table with a smile from ear to ear. I didn't know what to do. My mom had no idea how I'd been acting, and before I could do anything, she said, "Hi, honey." Honestly, I asked her to leave, but before she could leave, she started telling me about her big plan. She got up, took an electric razor out of her bag, and started shaving her head, dropping long strands of her blonde hair on the table. I stood there speechless, not knowing what to do or say. She told me that since I never wanted to go to UCLA and it had been a mistake to accept me, she was going to take my place. She would pretend to be me and no one would ever notice. At that moment, my mom walked in with the food, and when she saw her, she was shocked. She dropped the tray in surprise and the food fell to the floor. Meanwhile, with completely crazy eyes, she looked at her and said, "Hi, Mommy." And that was too much. At that moment, I had to get her out of the house, and she never went back to school after that. No one knew what happened to her. Her mom doesn't answer my calls, and neither does she, and the truth is, I'm worried that when I get to college in a few months, I'll see her there, pretending to be me. It's crazy, of course, but she seems out of her mind, and her mother is no better, so I think it's very possible. And you know what? Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about her and everything that could have been our story. It's like a nightmare that never ends. I still can't understand what happened to her or why she acted that way. I just hope she doesn't show up again, because this story still doesn't have a happy ending. I've never been one of those people who likes to celebrate Valentine's Day. For me, that date has always been kind of boring, and I don't really see the point of it, like New Year's Eve, which only ends in parties and promises that no one keeps. At the time, I was 20 years old and working at a small convenience store that was open 24 hours a day. Whenever I had to work those nights, I would tell everyone that I was staying at the store because I had no plans, and to be honest, I preferred to do nothing but hang out and wait for the night to pass. That particular night, I was on the early morning shift, so I had a pretty quiet night, doing the usual. The store was almost empty as usual. Most of the time during those shifts, I would watch videos on YouTube or catch up on a series on Netflix. The thing is, at around 1:30 in the morning, just as I was taking a break and thinking about what to have for dinner later, the bell rang, signaling that someone had entered. The guy was tall, and at first glance he seemed attractive, although I didn't know him very well. I just glanced at him quickly and said, "How's it going, sir? Everything okay tonight?" Quick response, "Cassie, is that you?" I was paralyzed for a few seconds. I couldn't believe he recognized me so suddenly, and that's when I realized he was a guy I knew in high school named Jake. We were never very close, but we always got along well and said hello when we ran into each other at school. Without thinking twice, I gave him a hug because, well, that's how I am, very old school, and sometimes I can't help but show affection like that, even if I haven't spoken to that person in years. We spent a couple of minutes catching up, and then I asked him, "What are you doing here so late, Jake?" He grimaced uncomfortably and said something like, "Well, I just broke up with my girlfriend a few days ago, and to be honest, I've been having trouble sleeping lately. I'm just hanging around with nothing much to do." I told him I was sorry to hear about the breakup and asked if he wanted anything, and he sincerely replied, "It's great to see you, really. If you don't mind, I'd love to stay and chat for a while." Honestly, I thought he was so sweet that I had no problem saying yes. The first 15 minutes of the conversation were pretty normal, even fun. We reminisced about old school days, laughing about some of our grades and the silly things we did back then. But as soon as those minutes passed, something in him began to change. He suddenly asked to go to the bathroom, and of course I told him he could go. While he was in the bathroom, I decided to look him up on Facebook to see if there was anything strange on his profile, and to my surprise I saw that we had some mutual friends and that his photos had some pretty disturbing things in them. One of the images I couldn't stop looking at had Jake holding knives, surrounded by symbols that looked like witchcraft or something weird, not normal at all. There were a lot of things I didn't understand, but what shocked me the most was that under his left pectoral, in the middle of all those strange symbols, was my name, in italics, Cassie. That's what put me on alert, but I kept thinking that maybe it was just a coincidence, even though it already smelled fishy. When he came out of the bathroom, that's when everything started to get really weird. He had my phone in his hands, and in an instinctive act I pretended that everything was normal, as if I hadn't been affected by the craziness I had just discovered. But his eyes gave me the chills. He looked at me, and in a low, almost sinister voice he said, "I'm so happy to see you again." Trying not to lose my cool, I replied, somewhat confused, "Oh yeah, same here, it's good to see you." Then suddenly he started banging his hands on the counter and looked at me with an expression that seemed completely insane. And that voice, which now sounded very aggressive, said to me, "You don't understand, I'm really happy to find you. I love you, Cassie, and we're meant to be together." At that moment, I felt completely paralyzed, filled with fear, and not knowing what to do. I could only say something quickly and nervously, "Thanks, Jake, but I'm seeing someone." It was a lie, of course, but at that moment nothing else came to mind. But then everything got out of control. He tried to grab my arm from the other side of the counter, and in a quick reaction I backed away as best I could and told him to leave. He took a step back, and his eyes now looked empty. He had that sadistic smile on his face, which looked more like a killer than a normal guy. Then, without further ado, he dropped his coat on the floor and took off his shirt. And oh my God, he was covered in tattoos. But not just any tattoos, no, these were creepy. On his chest on the left side was the word animal, written in a font that looked like it had been carved with a machete. But that wasn't all. His entire torso was covered with satanic symbols and others that I didn't recognize but were just as horrible. That's when I saw it. Under his left pectoral, right in the middle of a bunch of horrible symbols, was my name. When I saw it on Facebook, I thought it might just be a coincidence. But now I saw that it wasn't at all. It literally said Cassie in cursive. And at that moment, my heart stopped. But just when I thought I couldn't be any more scared, he took a knife out of his pocket and, with a deadly smile, started pointing it right at the tattoo of my name. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. I just stood there, in a state of total shock. I felt like I was spinning, like I was dreaming and wanted to wake up, but I couldn't. Jake started shouting my name. Cassie, Cassie, you see it's you on my chest. You're mine, Cassie, do you understand? His eyes were red and he seemed completely out of control. And then I realized that his trip to the bathroom was no coincidence. He had probably taken some kind of drug, and now he was crazy and I was at his mercy. I could only cry without saying anything, my heart racing. But at that moment, a miracle happened. Suddenly, a big man entered the store, a truck driver who was passing by and by chance saw all the madness. He didn't hesitate for a second. As soon as he saw what was happening, he ran over and pushed Jake. Jake got up but didn't flinch, and with that crazy look on his face, he just stared at me. The truck driver grabbed Jake and threw him to the ground again, pinned him down and took the knife away from him. At that moment, I took out my cell phone and started calling the police, thinking that all the madness was over. But as I was doing so, Jake suddenly sat up and jumped on the counter. He almost managed to reach me, but the truck driver knocked him down again and didn't let go until the authorities arrived. They finally arrested Jake, and only then was I able to breathe easy. I could hardly believe all the craziness that had just happened. I was literally saved by that man who happened to be coming in at that moment of greatest terror. It turns out he was a truck driver who had stopped for coffee and came across the whole scene. Since then, I feel like I owe him my life. I have no clear evidence of what Jake was planning or what he wanted to do to me, but the store cameras recorded everything, and that helped put him in prison for quite some time. Honestly, I still can't understand what happened to him, why he had such a strange obsession with me, or if he had been stalking me before and I hadn't realized it. I don't know when he started obsessing over me, and honestly, I don't care. I just hope he never gets the chance to find me again. That night was one of the scariest of my life, and it still makes my hair stand on end just thinking about it. A while ago, I had a pretty weird and disturbing experience that I still can't forget. It all started when I moved to a new city and didn't know anyone yet, so I started using some dating apps to see how that worked around here. After a few exchanges on Tinder, I came across a girl who seemed to be quite hippie-ish, quite artistic, and disconnected from the conventional. She seemed like one of those people who just goes with the flow, you know? We chatted a few times and finally agreed to meet up for a drink at a bar. I picked her up at her house. She came to the door, greeted me with a hug, and everything seemed normal. We agreed to go to a bar she had mentioned, one that was nearby. The first sign that something was wrong was when I got to my car. She followed me to the driver's door, and instead of getting in, she just stood there looking at me. I was confused for a few seconds, not understanding what she wanted, and asked her if she was going to get in. Then she smiled and said, "Sure, I'd love to." But instead of getting in on her side, she went around to the passenger side and started walking around the back of the car. At the time, I thought maybe she was smoking something and was more relaxed, so I didn't think much of it. As we drove to the bar, she kept talking in a very low voice, almost a whisper. I don't know if it was the alcohol or what, but I had a hard time understanding what she was saying, so I had to ask her to repeat herself several times because I couldn't even understand her whole sentence at once. We arrived at the bar, and to avoid any drama, I chose a spot in the back, away from most people, so we could chat quietly without disturbing anyone and so I could hear her well. The conversation was normal. We actually had a good time talking about unimportant things and laughing a little. She mentioned that she smoked weed recreationally and also used mushrooms and hallucinogenic substances from time to time. But it wasn't something that interested me much, so I didn't pay much attention to it. To me at least, she seemed a little high, and that could explain her strange behavior. I had had a few drinks though and was getting a little clumsy, so who knows if I was thinking clearly. I asked her if she wanted to go to my place after we finished at the bar, and she agreed without any problem. When we got there, we had a few more drinks, and that's when she started talking about her jewelry. That's where the story gets weird. She told me that those jewels were her big secret and that they defined her. I asked her why, and she blurted out that she was Anastasia, that she had never been killed in Russia, and that those jewels were her connection to her past. At that moment, being drunk, I couldn't take it very seriously. I countered with a bit of history and asked her what was true about that, but she got really angry and started screaming like crazy, saying that I didn't respect her ancestors and that it was disrespectful. Then, silently, she tiptoed up to me and suddenly grabbed me by the neck. I was very surprised by her strength. I was so drunk that I couldn't react immediately. Her hands were firm on my throat, but before I could do anything, she brought her face close to mine and said very seriously, "I am a shaman and I am going to curse you. My ancestors have destroyed many people and you don't respect that. You are an oppressor and you will be punished." At that moment, I was in shock, not knowing what to say or how to react. I only knew that her hands were squeezing my neck and I was starting to run out of air, but I was so drunk that I wasn't doing anything about it. Then she put her hand on a glass of whiskey on the table, broke it, and drew a small cross on my face with the broken glass, and then kissed me on the forehead as if nothing had happened. Right then I started to come to my senses, a little sobered up by the craziness of the situation, and I talked to her to calm her down. I ran my hand over the place where she had made the cross and realized there was no blood, so she hadn't cut me. I told her it was all a joke, that she wasn't serious, and she slowly started to return to normal. But the story doesn't end there. Then she started talking to me about her cat fetish. She told me that she had a kind of list of people she trained to act like cats, and that she liked to control their behavior. I'm not one to judge people for their quirks, so I listened to her without saying anything, and she started putting on a show in my living room, acting like a really weird cat, meowing and rubbing against the furniture. If she hadn't yelled at me earlier, I might have even found it interesting, but something inside me told me I had to get away from this woman. My instincts started going crazy, so I just stood there, trying not to bother her anymore and not to make her angry. Then something even stranger happened. She noticed the sage I had on the counter. It's a plant I use to cleanse the environment and add a little aroma to the house, and she started asking me to light it and bless the house with it. For me, that was something personal, a ritual I do from time to time, and I didn't want anyone else to touch it. I told her no, that I couldn't light it, that it was just for me and in my own way. But she got completely angry, started saying that I was a horrible person, and screamed throughout the room. By that point, I'd had enough of this crazy date, so I told her I could take her home if she wanted, and she ran out the door very angry. When I went out after her, she started yelling that I was a horrible guy and that I should die. At that point, I just left her outside, went back in and locked the door. I told her she could walk home on her own, but she didn't stay quiet. Within a few minutes, she started banging on the door for about 10 minutes straight, saying she had left her phone there and wanted it back. I was a little nervous, so I grabbed her phone from the counter, opened the door just a crack, and handed it to her. She tried to get in aggressively, pushing and struggling, but I blocked her with my forearm, not letting her pass. She seemed really ready to hit me, but I just stood my ground and told her I couldn't let her in. It was completely crazy. She screamed and yelled that she wanted the bottle of whiskey that was still on the table, and I replied that no, that bottle was mine because I had paid for it. In the end, I slammed the door shut, locked it, and listened to her banging on it for a while, a few minutes, until I finally heard her walk away. I waited a few minutes and then went out to see if she was still nearby. Thank God she was nowhere to be found. Since that night, I haven't seen her or heard from her again. It's not that this story is the scariest in the world, but after that, at night, I felt strange, as if I were always worried that she might be nearby again. To this day, I hope she's okay wherever she is, but honestly, I never want to run into that woman again. It started like any other normal night, a night of Netflix, relaxation, and nothing else. I'm 25 years old, and for a few weeks I had been seeing this girl, whom I'll call Miley. She's one of those girls who leaves you speechless, smart, funny, cool, and super attractive. From the moment I met her, I knew I liked her a lot. So one Friday night, I invited her to my apartment, where I live alone, to watch a horror movie, eat something, and drink some wine. I prepared everything well in advance. I cleaned the house thoroughly, chose a good scary movie, and bought a bottle of wine that I knew she would like. The idea was to spend a quiet evening together, without rushing, without distractions. Everything had to be perfect. The lights were dim, the movie started playing on the TV, and she and I were sitting on the couch, wine in hand, in a rather romantic atmosphere, actually. We laughed and shared a few kisses from time to time. But about halfway through the movie, I heard a very strange creaking sound, as if someone were slowly closing the bathroom door. I stood still, listening carefully, and asked her, "Did you hear that?" Millie looked at me with a surprised, somewhat confused expression. She said, "Was that the bathroom?" Honestly, I thought it was just the old apartment. Doors tend to make those noises when humidity or rain swells them a little, so I tried not to think too much of it, and we continued watching the movie. Within 5 minutes, my hand was on her shoulder and we were much closer than before. I looked into her eyes, she blushed, and so did I. And suddenly, without realizing it, we were kissing. That moment was almost magical. Everything was going great, until suddenly, a blood-curdling scream completely shattered the perfect atmosphere that had formed between us. We both jumped in fright, horrified, not understanding what had happened. The banging on the bedroom door, like glass breaking, made me think that it wasn't just Millie and me in that apartment. Someone else was home with us. We froze, both paralyzed, and she, her eyes wide, grabbed my arm and whispered, "What the hell was that?" I got up quickly and ran to the bedroom, hoping to find out what had happened. Maybe a bottle that had fallen or something. But when I got there, there she was. In the middle of the room, barefoot and with messy hair, was a girl I recognized immediately. It was my ex, Amy. That relationship we had was one of the most turbulent and difficult things I've ever been through in my life. But there she was, hunched over, holding my bottle of perfume in one hand and Miley's sweatshirt in the other. There was broken glass from the window everywhere, and she had some small cuts on her hands, although she didn't seem to have noticed. She looked at me with a completely deranged expression, as if she had lost her mind. And at that moment, it was as if everything had gone to hell. "She doesn't know you like I do. She's no better than me," she whispered, in a very strange and twisted voice. In total shock, I said, "What the hell are you doing here, Amy?" She began to walk slowly, sniffing the sweatshirt and muttering things about Miley as if she were possessed by something. I didn't have to be a fortune teller to realize she was either drugged or very drunk, which was nothing new. That was one of the main reasons our relationship was a complete mess. But now she seemed to be in a much worse state. Millie asked me who that girl was, and I had to answer her with embarrassment that she was my ex, my crazy ex. She looked at me with a scared face, and that's when Amy tried to lunge at her. It was complete madness. Millie, in a panic, ran to the door screaming, trying to escape, but then Amy ran after her and grabbed her by the hair. Automatically, I managed to grab her by the waist and fight to pull her away from Miley and get her out of there. But she wouldn't let go. She was screaming, kicking, spitting, and acting like a total lunatic. Her face was contorted with rage, and she kept repeating insults at Miley as if it were a curse on her. I yelled at Miley to run to the kitchen and call the police, and in the meantime, I tried to hold Amy down and get her into the room. The struggle was intense, She kept scratching me, crying, laughing, insulting, and cursing. What can I say? She was more out of control than ever, and my heart was racing. Finally, I pushed her to the floor and locked her in my room. Millie and I stood outside the door in shock at everything that had happened, until suddenly everything went quiet, as if something had happened. But before Millie could say anything else, there was a soft knock on the bedroom door. I didn't know what to think at that moment, and then suddenly Amy started laughing. At first it was a nervous, almost childish laugh, and then she started laughing again. It was a totally psychotic scene, like something out of a horror movie. I couldn't take any more risks. I felt that this girl had hit rock bottom and something in her had completely broken. So we called the police. It took the officers about 10 minutes to arrive, but when they did, Amy was still in shock, hunched over on the bed, staring at the floor with a blank expression. She didn't even resist when the officers handcuffed her. They looked on in silence, and she just turned her gaze to me and said in a calm voice, "I just wanted to talk to you. How could you trade me for her?" When they tried to take her away, she refused, started screaming, demanding her place and accusing me of cheating on Millie with another girl. She said she understood me better than anyone else and that she still loved me. The police had to take her away by force while Millie and I watched from the living room window as she was taken away in the patrol car. She wasn't screaming anymore, she just looked lost, as if she had reached her limit. Later I found out that Amy had gotten in using the spare key I always kept under the flower pot outside the door. She snuck in without anyone noticing and waited in the bathroom until we arrived, then slipped into my room right during the movie. She was watching us the whole time. What I don't understand is why she broke the window if she had keys. But hey, she's crazy, anything is to be expected. She's currently being treated at a mental health center, and I never actually pressed charges because I didn't want to drag it out any longer. But yes, since that day I changed all the locks, and above all, I never stopped keeping the door securely locked. Millie is still in my life, and although she says she'll never forget that night, the truth is that neither will I. It's something I'll never forget. So the next time you plan a night of Netflix and relaxation, it might be worth checking those locks very carefully, because you never know what might be waiting in the next room. It was the spring of 2017 and I was living in a small apartment in Brooklyn with my best friend Claire. We had both come to New York from our respective small towns in the countryside. And believe me, we were completely overwhelmed by how big the city was. We met at a coffee shop when we heard each other's southern accents. She had grown up in Kentucky while I was from West Virginia. We had had very similar childhoods filled with rural landscapes and simple traditions. So we had a lot in common in terms of humor and tastes, and we quickly clicked. However, there was one big difference between us. While Claire was sad to leave her family, friends, and small town, I didn't feel the same way. My home was a complicated place. It was full of drama and emotional scars that we had carried since childhood. My parents weren't bad people, but the tragedy that struck us when I was a child left a deep mark on our family. And although I often wore a mask of confidence, inside I was dealing with a pain that never seemed to go away. Despite our differences, meeting Claire was a blessing. However, as we settled more into New York life, we began to crave a little more male connection. You know how it is, sometimes just being together isn't enough, so we decided to try our luck with some dating apps. While Claire enjoyed Bumble, where the girls started the conversations, I felt overwhelmed by Tinder and Hinge. But to my surprise, Claire matched with a pretty interesting guy. The man was attractive, intelligent, and also from the South, although he said he had moved around a lot as a child and didn't feel like he was from any particular place. After a few dates, she decided to bring him to our apartment to introduce him to me and finally show him her place. It was a promising night. Claire was nervous but excited, and I was somewhat anxious to meet her new guy. I was on my couch watching Netflix and devouring some cookies when I heard the door open. Then Claire walked in with her date, and I began making introductions and striking up casual conversation. But as I talked to him, something began to unsettle me. There was something strangely familiar about his face. Unfortunately, this is where my story takes a dark turn. When I was 10, I lost my brother Ryan. His killer was someone my family knew well, and that had always haunted me. I was only 6 when my parents decided to leave me with my grandparents and told me it would only be for one night. But after 3 days, they finally came back and told me that Ryan wasn't coming back. The explanation they gave was that he had gone to heaven. Death was a confusing concept for me at that age, and although I was sad that I would never see my brother again, the real pain came much later. I didn't fully understand what it meant to lose someone permanently until I got a little older. Finding out the circumstances surrounding Ryan's death was what really broke me, and at some point I learned that he had been murdered, and that the person responsible had been a friend of his, someone who was supposed to have loved him. That boy's name was Marcus Clark, and it still echoes in my head to this day. I couldn't stop thinking about how someone so skinny and scruffy had been capable of causing my family so much pain. As I listened to Claire laugh and flirt with her date on the couch, her boyfriend's face began to transform into Marcus's in my mind. My heart raced as I realized that the guy I knew was connected to my brother's death. At that moment, the laughter felt like a distant echo as my memories of Ryan began to flood back. I tried to focus on the conversation, but every time I looked at the guy, I saw the shadow of a painful past I had tried to bury. I remembered Ryan's laughter, his face lighting up with joy on field trips, only to be erased by the harshness of reality. Behind his smile, there were sinister secrets that still haunted me. Overwhelmed and feeling like I couldn't take it anymore, I abruptly got up from the couch. I felt like the space was closing in on me, and I needed to get away from there. Claire noticed that something was wrong and asked me about it, but I told her I just needed some fresh air and ran out of the apartment, trying to escape the oppressive feeling of being back in that horrible moment of my childhood. During the time I spent behind the door trying to breathe, the weight of the memories weighed on my chest like a slab. I didn't know if I could allow this new guy into Claire's life, and I couldn't help but think that sometimes the past has a strange way of manifesting itself in the most unexpected moments. I remember that guy's eyes were so dark brown that honestly they looked black. Those eyes became the stars of many nightmares I had for years, and everything became even more terrifying when I finally learned the truth about how he had killed my brother. Marcus's confession left me frozen. Ryan, my brother, had been playing near the railroad tracks one afternoon when Marcus, who was a boy from the neighborhood, found an old piece of railroad track lying around. It was a heavy piece of metal, and even though he said it felt like he was carrying something huge, he decided it would be a good toy. So while Ryan was crouched down tying his shoes, Marcus just looked at him. And in that instant, madness took hold of him, and he began to imagine what it would sound like if he hit my brother with that piece of metal. And that's exactly what he did. I remember being told that it was a horrible blow, which left him convulsing. At that moment, Marcus realized he was in trouble, and instead of running to help, he decided to hide what he had done. He hit him on the head one more time, and then in a panic, according to him, he dug a shallow grave and dragged his body about 100 yards away. I heard that Ryan's injuries were horrific. Not only did he hit him, but after dragging him away, they did unimaginable things to him. Sometimes I find it difficult to process what I heard, but what I can't forget is how his eyes and fingers were missing, as if someone had wanted to completely destroy him. All of that was scary, but the idea that this boy, who used to be one of my brother's friends, had done something like that left me speechless. The police questioned Marcus, but instead of burying his conscience, he decided to lie and say that the injuries were the result of what he had done afterwards. How could they let him get away with that? In the end, because he was so young, they sent him to a reformatory and gave him a new identity when he turned 18. Seriously? The power of youth over justice. Horrible, isn't it? For years, nightmares tormented me, and the more I learned about Ryan's death, the more real they became. I dreamed that Marcus came back and tried to do the same thing to me. I had no idea where he was, but on those nights I felt like I was one step away from him. Marcus's dark eyes followed me everywhere I went and were like shadows lurking, ready to catch me. The city became a terrifying place, and even though life went on, I could only think about that shadow looming over me, reminding me that some nightmares don't end when you wake up. The shadows left by Ryan's death were still very much alive in my mind, and the echo of his loss still resonated too strongly. I can't stop thinking about my brother, and now it's time to find out what's going on. The only thing I really remembered about Marcus were his coal-black eyes and messy hair. Those features became the characteristics of this monster I had created in my mind. Over time, nightmares began to orbit them, turning any shadow of a dark strand of hair into a constant horror. That night, when I met Claire's Bumble date, something curious happened to me. Although the guy was attractive, there was something about the color of his eyes and the way he acted that I found disturbing. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to scare Claire for no reason. But as we talked, I began to piece things together. He was clearly reluctant to talk about his family and always changed the subject when we touched on his childhood. But when he mentioned something traumatic that had happened to him as a child, his expression changed. That's when everything felt strange. The atmosphere became heavy, as if something wasn't right. When I mentioned that I grew up in West Virginia, he gave me a guilty look that felt like a punch in the stomach. Suddenly, the light-hearted conversation turned into a silent competition, a battle of tense glances. Claire, who was aware of my discomfort, asked me what was going on. Her nervous laughter didn't help because I couldn't explain how I felt. At that moment, the atmosphere was charged with memories I didn't want to remember, like Marcus's shadow lurking. Without thinking, I asked, "Marcus?" The question came out of my mouth before I could stop myself, and the way he looked at me afterward, those dark eyes taking over his whole being, made my blood run cold. There he was, standing in front of me, my brother's killer, and my worst nightmares had come true. "I should go," he said, as if he knew that in an instant everything had become dangerous. I couldn't find the words, so I just stood there in shock while Claire said, "What just happened? Who is Marcus? Wait, where are you going?" It was as if time had stopped, and before I knew it, he had slipped out the door. All I could manage to mumble was, "Don't come back." Confusion flooded me. Everything I had done to overcome this nightmare seemed to collapse in an instant. I had this intense reaction that was almost comical, as if the universe was playing with me, throwing Marcus right in my path in the big city, as if to remind me that I couldn't escape the past, let alone the pain of Ryan's death. Claire tried to calm me down and started a random conversation. "New York is huge, right? It's the best place to get lost in the crowd," she said to comfort me. Her support was incredible during that nightmare, and it helped solidify our friendship even more. Through this madness, I learned something valuable. You never know who you're talking to. They may seem charming and perfectly normal, but behind that facade, there could be a dark side you can't even imagine. They might even tell you fairy tales, but at the end of the day, they're just trying to hide their sins. The blood will always be on their hands no matter how hard they try to wash it off. That was the last time I saw Marcus, who now has another name, and since then, I have had no peace. It's as if everything I wanted to escape from is following me, and whenever I go out for a walk around town or to work, I'm constantly afraid of running into him again. Deep down, I really hope that after that awkward encounter with me, he decided to move away, because judging by his attitude that night, I'm sure he's also desperate to escape that past. I can't say I've had the best luck with guys. Since I separated from Jack, my son's father, things have been a disaster. After 5 years together, love became a battlefield, so I decided it was time to be myself, but above all, to have peace. After a few months of being a single mother, one day my neighbor Oscar approached me with the idea that a friend of his wanted to meet me. I must say that at first I wasn't very enthusiastic about it, but Oscar insisted so much that I finally agreed to go out with this guy named Leon. The first 6 months of dating Leon were great. He was fun, kind, and made me laugh, but little by little things started to change. He began to drink more and more, and every time he did, he became someone completely different from the kind and loving man I had fallen in love with. It was as if some kind of inner demon took advantage of him every time he had too much to drink, and he ended up doing absolutely reprehensible things. Leon started getting into fights with strangers and sometimes even with some of our friends. So slowly everyone started to drift away, knowing what happened when Leon had too much to drink. But he didn't seem to care in the least, because he just kept drinking without stopping, and the change in his attitude became more and more obvious. But it wasn't long before all that anger fell on me, and that's when everything turned into hell. In a few months, what started as absurd arguments, unfair complaints, and constant fighting soon escalated, until it quickly escalated, and soon we went from words to shoving, and then to hitting. One day he hit me so hard that I fell to the ground, almost unconscious. At that moment, I became very aware of how badly everything had turned out, and little by little I began to feel more and more trapped in that abusive relationship. I tried to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but nothing seemed to get better. The abuse became more and more intense and brutal, and I felt more and more helpless. I know that many people will judge me and ask why I put up with all that and didn't leave him, and the truth is that I don't even know myself. The problem with abusive relationships is that the abuser manages to lower your self-esteem so much, to break you down so much that in the end you feel helpless, captive, and you really feel incapable of doing anything. I remember one night in particular that marked me forever. It was a Friday. I had spent the day taking care of my son Adam, who was only 3 years old and had a slight cold. As Leon was getting ready to go out that afternoon, I told him I wanted to stay home and take care of Adam. But he disagreed and started drinking as usual, which was already beginning to make me nervous. As the night wore on, he ended up very drunk, just as I feared, and around 2:30 a.m., I heard him come into our bedroom. I tried to pretend to be asleep, but I knew what was coming, and that feeling of panic and anticipation was horrible. Suddenly I felt his hand on my head, pulling my hair and dragging me out of bed. "I know you're avoiding me," he whispered. Then he started yelling at me, accusing me of wanting to leave him and cheating on him with another man. Leon began making accusations, saying that there was surely someone else and demanding that I tell him who it was. With every word that came out of his mouth, I could see his rage growing, and I remember him saying with certainty that if he ever saw me with another man, he would kill me and him too. However, what terrified me most about that threat was the serenity with which he made it, as if there wasn't a shred of doubt in him. But almost immediately, his calmness had vanished, and all that was left was a madman filled with rage and a strong desire to hurt me. Like a raging beast, Leon hit me several times with such brutality that I collapsed to the floor, almost unconscious but not satisfied. He began to kick me, and I knew I had to get away or this time he would kill me. So I began to crawl away, trying to call for help, but at one point he knelt in front of me and said, "Where do you think you're going?" He lifted me up by my hair and crossed his arms with a smile of satisfaction that made my blood run cold. I felt completely helpless and scared. "Stay there or I'll hurt you even more," he added as he settled down on the sofa, looking me in the eyes while I sobbed on the floor. Somehow he seemed to get tired, and after a few minutes he fell asleep. I thought this was my chance, so I put on a large shirt, picked up my son and approached the door, but suddenly, Leon woke up and saw what I was doing. "Where are you going?" he asked me angrily. But I asked for a moment to think and realized I had to act fast, so I told him I was going to the kitchen to get him something to drink. The distraction worked, and when I entered the kitchen, I ran out the front door, without shoes, without pants, with nothing but my shirt and my son in my arms. I ran out a mess, my whole body aching, to the police station, which was only a few blocks from where I lived. And when I got there, I was so scared that I could hardly think about what I was doing. The entrance was simple. There was a button you pressed to talk to someone, so I ran in, pressed the button while sliding to the floor holding Adam. I was completely terrified, expecting Leon to come through the door at any moment. I couldn't stop thinking that if he came, at least it would be recorded on the security cameras. Finally, I heard a voice over the speaker. "How can I help you?" All I could do was cry. I couldn't utter a single word. I felt so lost and scared that I couldn't even say anything. At that moment, 2 officers came to help me. One of them, a girl, approached Adam and gave him something to eat while I talked to another officer. I began to tell them everything that had happened, and he seemed genuinely concerned. He offered me a blanket to keep me warm and comfortable and told me they needed to take me to a hospital. However, barely 15 minutes had passed when I heard Leon shouting my name from somewhere, and my heart stopped when I heard his voice, holding my breath as I wondered if he knew I was there, just behind the door. Shortly after, an officer returned with a sergeant. At that moment, I thought they would ask me to go home to collect my things while Leon was in custody, but instead, they started asking me a lot of questions about his violent behavior and whether there had been any previous problems with abuse. I began to tell them how he had become aggressive when he drank and told them about his alcohol dependency. That's when they showed me a handwritten list that Leon had made with his own plans. This list detailed how he planned to strangle me, dismember my body, and where he planned to bury it so that I would never be found. I felt the air rush out of me as I read those words, tears streaming down my face. I looked at the officer, terrified, and asked him what it meant. He looked at me seriously and told me that, in essence, I had been very lucky because Leon had been charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, and assault before. Before the trial began, I decided to move to a small town in Arizona. I didn't want to look back, so I gave a detailed statement before I left. Leon, of course, pleaded not guilty, but in the end he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Just before I left, I received a letter from him. It simply said, "It's not over, you will always be mine." That letter chilled me to the bone, but I knew I was finally free of his control. I was ready to start a new life. I received psychological therapy and also enrolled in self-defense classes, something I have become very good at. I also bought a gun and learned how to shoot, so if that monster ever crosses my path again, now he's the one who will have to watch out for me.